Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Peak District National Park Authority on the 17th of March. I'm going by the clock that I can see, which is not quite the same as the clock behind me, but it's more or less 10 o'clock, so we'll make a start. Welcome, everyone. We'll go into the agenda, starting with the roll call of members present, apologies for absence, and members' declarations of interest. I've got three apologies so far: Councillor Mike Chaplin, Councillor Becky Woods and Councillor Ian Huddleston. So, Joe, if we could do the roll call, please.
Could members please indicate whether they're present and if they have any declarations of interest? Councillor Armitage.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Mr Beresford.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Brady.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Chapman.
Present, no interests.
Councillor Farrell.
Present, no interest, though I don't have an interest in the visitor centre, but I don't think it's on the thing.
Councillor Finesse.
Present, no.
Councillor Greaves.
Work. Present, no interest. Councillor Greaves. Present, no interest.
Councillor Gregory.
Present, no interest.
Professor Haddock Fraser.
Present and no interests.
Mr Hamid.
Present, no interest.
Ms Harling.
Present, no interest. Not quite.
With a red light, there we go.
Councillor Hart.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Councillor Heath.
Just present, no interest, thank you.
Councillor McLaren.
Present, no declaration.
Councillor Murphy.
Present and no declarations.
Switch it off now.
Councillor Potter.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Councillor Priestley.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Councillor Richardson.
Present, no declarations.
Miss Slack.
Present, no declarations.
Mr Smith.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Tapping.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Warmby.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Ms Witter.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Councillor McCloy.
Present, no declarations of interest. Thank you very much. The microphones are struggling to catch up with one or two members, so just be patient, but I think they are getting there. Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, 3rd of February. Are we satisfied they're a true record? Any? Thank you. Seconded. All in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Urgent business? None tabled. No members of the public have registered to speak, so no public participation today. So let's move on to item 5, Chair's briefing. Just quite briefly from me. The one thing I was going to mention was last week I attended the All-Party Parliamentary Group for National Parks meeting at the Houses of Parliament in my role as National Parks England Chair. I was accompanied by several other chairs of English national parks. It was a very positive, very crowded meeting in a basement room at the House of Commons. The theme was nature recovery, and for an hour we set out our stall on what national parks are doing to meet the government's environmental improvement programme targets and the 30 by 30 ambitions, and gave a snapshot of work across the national parks, including the Peak District. As I say, it was there were a number of MPs and members of the House of Lords that turned up, asked questions, and we also had the presence of the DEFRA Minister, Trudy Harrison, for most of the meeting, who actively participated and congratulated national parks for the work that we're doing. Of course, we took the opportunity to point out we could be doing even more if we had sufficient resources and powers, but it was a really positive exchange. She also indicated that the government will be shortly setting out the actions that it's proposing to take on the back of the landscapes review. It's already indicated its response, but she suggested the actions that they hope to carry out will be announced soon. And separately, because there were a number of Lords there, the amendments to the Levelling Up Bill, which have gone through the Lords, and I think it is still there, hopefully that might see some strengthened powers for national parks, in particular around statutory purposes and management plans. But that's still active at the moment. But there are a number of parliamentarians who are very much supporting the National Parks agenda and understand the need to strengthen our hand if we are to really deliver on the big ticket items. So very positive. The other output from the day was, and everyone's got a copy of this in front of them, this what's called an infographic, I'm told, that National Parks England produce to just to inform parliamentarians of some of the big numbers and some of the big deliverables that national parks are collectively delivering for the nation, for everything from visitor engagement to nature recovery to farming. You'll see it there, and please take it away with you and share it in your respective networks. It is compelling, some of those statistics and some of the figures there. In particular, the return on investment that national parks show, and such good value as well. I reinforced at the APPG the fact that national parks cost the taxpayer 80 pence per person per year for what we deliver free on the point of entry. So it's just a good reminder that English national parks, or national parks generally, are doing great work and can do even more with the right resources. And then two other housekeeping notes. Thank you everyone who have completed the members' survey. I know there are still one or two members who haven't, and if you haven't been already, you will be buttonholed by Ruth Crowder before you leave today. She'll have paper copies as well as signposting you to digital. Can you just make sure that everyone completes it, because it's really useful for us to get feedback and to understand how we're doing and how we can improve. And finally, at the end of the authority meeting, which will be fairly quick this morning, we're going to have a member's photo. This has been requested by the Chief Executive to go with the new management plan document. And if the weather holds up, apparently we'll be marched out to the lawn outside, and everyone will be asked to smile at the camera. So at the end of the authority meeting, please don't hurry off. We'll have a quick photo, and then after that we'll go into the members' forum with the Chief Executive, which again will be relatively short. So I'm hoping that we will wrap things up in good time this morning. So yes, I know, Chris. A couple of other members said, I wished I'd dressed up this morning, but don't worry about it. It's the smile that counts. So moving on, item 6, just for information, the Chief Executive's report. Phil's here if you've got any questions, but it's a good roundup of the activities and the energy that Phil is putting into to the role. Okay, thank you very much. And then, so let's move on to the two main items this morning. Item 7, the capital strategy, 2023-24 through to 27-28. I'm going to look to Justine, Head of Finance, to introduce this item.
So good morning, everybody. As Andrew has just mentioned, I'm bringing today the refresh of the capital strategy, which is overdue. The previous strategy being the period 2015 to 2020. The capital strategy is one of 3 documents required by CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, as part of their prudential code, under which the authority operates. The other 2 being the Treasury Management and Investment strategies that are also on this agenda this morning. Members are being asked to approve the capital budget for 23-24, which is shown at Appendix 1. This is usually included with the revenue budget approval, but was delayed to ensure that the capital budgets were aligned to the capital programme. The capital budget for 23-24 includes previous approved projects, as well as new business cases for Warslow and North Lees, which will be subject to individual business cases. Members are also asked to approve the key principles for capital projects at Appendix 2, and this is for capital business cases to be reviewed against. They're quite broad so as not to stifle creativity and to allow for ideas to be explored within a business case. Briefly, they are for capital expenditure for health and safety and any other regulations, capital projects that fit strategically with the authority's purposes, to ensure that whole life costs of a project are fully assessed and included, and that creation and replacement of assets have long-term sustainability. These are very similar to the principles included in the previous strategy, but have been updated mainly to include any health and safety or other regulatory obligations. Moving on to the capital programme shown at Appendix 3, I've been working with the IT and asset management teams to pull this programme together. And this is based on the asset management plan, the IT plan, and it also includes business plans for our estates such as Warslow and North Lees. The timings and costs of these projects are estimates and may be subject to change depending on available resources and business case approvals. Business cases will be brought forward for projects within the capital programme as per the standing orders and will be judged on their own individual merits. This does not preclude other business cases being brought forward that are not currently included within the capital programme, but it does mean that the authority has a clear picture of what the current plans are. The authority is estimating to spend around £2.9 million on new projects between 23-24 and 27-28, of which 1.25 million is expected to be funded from the disposal of surplus assets as per the asset management plan to reinvest back in the authority's assets. All disposals will be subject to the authority's disposal toolkit. Some of the planned disposals are from the Warslow estate, and it should be noted that under the approvals from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, proceeds from the estate should be reinvested back into the Warslow estate. It is also expected that there will be a need to borrow of around £650,000, which is expected to be internally borrowed. Finally, it is recommended that the capital strategy is combined with the annual Treasury Management Report. Approvals given annually as part of the Treasury Management Report relate to the capital strategy, including things like the minimum revenue provision policy, the authorised borrowing limit and the operational boundary. Therefore, it makes sense to combine the two. This also means that the capital strategy can be more responsive to change and will be reviewed each year. Thank you.
Justine, thank you very much. Members, any questions or any comments? We've got Matt Freestone in the back of the room if there are specific questions about some of the figures around the estate, land and buildings. Yes, let's start with Annabelle Harling.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, looking at a capital programme, there's a cut-off point where there are things that we're planning that we can fund and things that fall outside that. Can you just give us an idea of how that you've made that decision and maybe what are the major things that we can't quite get into this funding envelope at the moment?
Sorry. What do you mean we can't quite get it into the funding envelope? I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, what's not in this forecast? What landed just outside the forecast? Does that make sense?
Bear with me 1 second. So working with predominantly with Matt, we actually have business plans that run out to 2031, 32 that include predominantly things on the Warslow estate that we know into the long term, but obviously I felt that putting all of that information in, it's too far into the future. It's just a plan at the moment, and I didn't want to overwhelm members with the volume of data.
No, that's fine. It's just to get an impression of the cut-off procedure.
And it was just that felt like 5 years seemed a reasonable time period, and obviously I want to review this every year, so there'll be another year sort of put on each year.
Okay.
Thank you. Chris Finesse.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on the cycle stock, which is on the estimates of capital expenditure. Cycle hire is doing very well at the moment, So I'm wondering why we're not focusing any expenditure right through to the 28.
Because I don't have the data.
Oh,
I've kind of done an estimate of what I know about,
yeah.
but we haven't got that estimate yet going forward.
But there will be some, presumably, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Janet Haddock-Fraser.
Yeah, Justine, thank you for this report. In terms of the principles that you've outlined, principle number 4 looks at the creation and replacement of assets in terms of long-term sustainability. Can I ask, and it's probably a question for Matt Freestone, which is that when we're looking at assets that have, particularly things like IT equipment, to what extent are we thinking about the environmental implications, maybe opportunities to recycle goods items when we don't need them, or the carbon implications of assets that we're purchasing and using? Does that come within the principles as well?
I've just asked Matt to come and join us and take a microphone to answer that.
I can just add something about the IT. So I know from sort of speaking to David McMahon that IT equipment is sent back to be refurbished after our use. So I know about the IT equipment.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our ongoing investment into our assets, you know, sustainability and improving their environmental performance and reducing our emissions are always a big part of that, and they have been for a number of years. I think one thing we don't have an answer to as yet, but we probably need to give some thought to, is around disposals and whether we integrate into the decision-making issues around how far we can go with some properties in terms of making them more sustainable. So that's something I think, you know, as we develop the asset management plan, we probably need to look at as part of the disposals toolkit in particular.
Thank you. David Chapman.
Thanks. Justine, just a quick question on that. You stated on the Worslow Moors estate that any monies from the sale of the estate would be invested back into the estate. So what proportion of the estate do we intend to dispose of, and what's left? What are we going to do with that?
Can look to
that. Chris Manby has developed a business plan that looks over the next 10 years, and over that period there are a number of properties that we've recognised for disposal that are peripheral to the estate and surplus to the estate, that will also fund the investment that's needed. So at this stage we're looking at around 8 to 10 properties. Not all of them actual built assets, some of them are land, but 8 to 10 properties, if you like.
Can I just add a second check? What's the proportion value-wise, Matt, of the disposal versus what will be left? Sort of?
We're talking less than 10% of the value of the estate, I would estimate. I haven't given that a huge amount of thought, but off the top of my head, yeah.
And maybe it's just worth reminding some newer members that Worslow Moors is, as Justine indicated, is quite unique in terms of our portfolio insofar as it was bequeathed to us many years ago in lieu of death duties, and it came with some very strict legal conditions, which means we can't just willy-nilly dispose or change things there. And we have been negotiating, we've had a dialogue with government to try and relax some of those rules, and this is part of that progression. Patrick Brady. We can hear you, Patrick.
Somebody else got theirs on? Yeah. Okay, thanks so much. I'd like to come back to that last question eventually, but can I just start on the key principles? I know these fit to some extent with what we've got at the moment, but just sort of reading them through and thinking aloud, I do apologise. I might not have understood things properly. I didn't get my agenda until Tuesday because the snow was higher than my gate. And so I haven't had much time to sort of get to grips with it. But looking at the second principle, we're talking about fitting with the purposes in the long term, and it uses the word strategically. I'm not entirely sure what the significance of that is. And then it goes on about being in line with the asset management plan and the authority plan. For me, there are two missing elements in this somewhere. Apart from our purposes, we have a number of duties, and some of those duties are things we should have regard to in those principles. But also, we have a management plan, which is supposed to set the scene for everything. Now, I don't know whether strategically is a side reference to the management plan, or whether there should be a specific reference in meeting the objectives of the management plan. But as we put an awful lot of effort into having a management plan for the purposes of helping to direct our policies and priorities one way or another, I do wonder whether there's some redrafting there that could make what we're trying to do there much more clear. The second point I would make on this is in relation to paragraph 4. And again, it may just be the way it's worded. It says, subject to the asset management plan and the authority plan, which is our corporate plan, of course, these should be given priority. I'm not sure why they should necessarily be given priority, unless we're saying that the authority plan gives them priority. Do you understand the point I'm trying to make? Again, I think there's some rather loose wording there that would benefit from being tidier. Moving on, I mean, when you first read this, you realise that certainly in the next year or so, over half our capital programme is going into Warslow and North Lees. And actually it gets bigger as we go through the years, and it gets up to something like about 2/3 is going into those two sites. So I have one question at least, which is following on from David's question. Of that 900-odd thousand, I think it is, that's going into Warslow, how much of that is paid for by disposals from Warslow?
All of it.
All of it is paid for, okay. And North Lees is entirely paid for out of other resources. It doesn't generate any resources of its own.
North Lees is a combination of the business plan that Emma Stone brought to committee a year ago, last March, I think, which is based on borrowing and additional income generation on the estate. And some of it is based on the condition survey work, which the authority is, at this point, is funding, although we are going to look at that to try and see how we can fund that in other ways, if needed.
Nonetheless, I'll make the comment that it does slightly worry me that actually in the whole of my time on the authority, we've never really had a discussion or a debate about whether there are other things we should be doing through our capital programme. And what we've got here is a very substantial sum of money going into North Lees, which is only a very small part of the whole national park. And I do hope over the year ahead we could start thinking, arising out of our management plan and other plans, whether there are other things we should be doing, because I mean our job is to have a responsibility for the whole national park, and all our resources are going into a very small part of it, and I have to say that rather worries me.
Patrick, thank you for your comments. Your first points around the principles, I'm looking to Justine and to Phil as well. I think there could be some tightening up of the wording there, not least to bring in the management plan by name as well, because all these strategic documents should talk to each other and should be read together. May I suggest from the chair that if we approve this, you delegate it to myself in consultation with the Chief Executive just to look again at the wording, especially in principles 2 and 4, just to tighten them up as Patrick suggested. Does that meet everyone's approval? Thank you. Any other questions or any other points? So, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Really good points. And I think they really reflect the funding environments that there. So any revenues from Warslow have to go back into Warslow. So that's why you'll see a lot of our expenditure there. And North Lees is, although you say that the park is much bigger than North Lees, if we're going to invest in assets, then it's better to invest in our own. And, you know, we only own a relatively small amount of the park, and North Lees is, you know, quite a large part of what we own other than Warslow, which has its own, you know, revenue stream for investment. So that I think explains why you'll see lots of our investment in those two areas. And then on top of that, there's always kind of funding, external funding streams that come up for capital programs, you know, as political will kind of comes and goes. And when those funding streams open up, for example, you know, in the past we've invested in the trails and the tunnels and so on, and that's because there's been external funding pots. So we are slightly directed as to where we invest based on the money that isn't ours that we can use that's out there. So I hope that kind of gives some context.
Can I come back on that?
Yes,
Chairman?
of course, Patrick.
I agree with everything you've just said. I'm not sort of arguing with you, but I'm conscious of the fact that we have, for example, in the management plan, all these proposals for visitor hubs and the concerns about visitor management and so on and so forth, some of which can be turned into revenue-producing things. If we did that in the right place and in the right way, we would also be making a way forward and really performing our wider duty to the whole of the national park. And I'm not saying we should change something now. I'm just saying that I hope by the time this comes before you all in a year's time, we're starting to think about what we can get out of our management that should go into the capital programme.
Thank you, Patrick.
Chair, can I just come back on two things? I think one thing I want to add, Patrick, is what the capital programme excludes by its nature is the investment that's being made in the trails at the moment. So the trails are funded by a revenue reserve, and there's been quite a lot of expenditure happening there. So there is other work going on elsewhere in the park, just obviously to add to what Phil was saying. And also the capital programme and the plans that I have is a snapshot right now of the things that are known about. So definitely take your point on board about that sort of visitor investment, because that is still being thought about.
So Justine, in that case, and taking your point on, just for clarity, Appendix 3, the capital programme, where in the future years, for instance, trail structures have got 0 by them, that is likely to change as we look to the next, I don't know, condition survey or repairs and so forth, because we know that trail structures in particular come with big liabilities and big overheads. Matt?
Yeah, you're right, but the investment we've made over the last few years is addressing a massive backlog. You know, we hadn't invested in the trails for... We'd never invested any great amount in the trails, so there was a massive backlog that we had to catch up on. What I'm hoping to do now, and we're kind of managing them in a slightly different way, is prioritise the work differently using a very technical railway structures management system that will allow us to put less in more regularly. That I hope we will largely fund from revenue most years. I'm not saying it always will be, but you know, we're kind of approaching it slightly differently. So, you know, I don't know, what I'm saying is I don't expect us to be spending that amount of money in the next 10 to 15 years on the trail again. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yeah, just a quick question, Chair. I think it's probably to Matt. I don't know if anybody's walked the Tissington Trail past the Thorpe Station area, but it's absolutely a nightmare to see the work that's going on with Ash Dieback. It's horrendous. So I just wondered how much that is going to cost us, and is that included in this this figure?
Well, Ash Dieback isn't capital work as yet, so it's not included in here. It's something we're looking at whether we can capitalise it, but it's not included in here at this point. You know, the work along the Tissington Trail is probably the most significant ash dieback works we're going to be doing, certainly along the trails. That's cost 112,000 if I remember rightly. You know, we will be looking at our woodlands and, you know, car park sites with trees on, and we have a plan in place for that, and there are costs, but because of various factors, they are coming down from when you know, the original estimates. But like I say, they're not in here because, you know, we can't consider them to be capital as yet.
Okay, thank you, Matt. If there's no other questions or comments, you'll see the recommendations. I've suggested that Chief Executive and I just look at the principles in particular and just review the references in particular to the management plan. But on that basis, do we have to amend the recommendation?
Yes, so if you amend recommendation 2, and just add in with the detailed wording being delegated to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Chair of the Authority, that will do it. So you'll need a mover and a second.
Good. In that case, mover Zahid, thank you. Second, Charles. All in favour? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Then we'll move on to item 8, the Treasury Management Policy Statement, Annual Treasury Management and Investment Strategy. Justine, to you again.
Thank you, Chair. So this, as usual, this report is quite complicated in its length and scope, but this is dictated by the requirements of the Local Government Act 2003 and the codes covering capital finance and treasury management as issued by SIPFA, as I mentioned on the previous agenda item. Local authority members will see similar reports from their authorities too. So the requirements of this strategy, due to 2 historic events, in 2004 it was allowed that local authorities could borrow for capital purposes based on their own assessment of need rather than a centrally imposed one. And the 2008 Icelandic bank collapses, which highlighted shortfalls in local authority investment practices. So whilst these are historic events, they are still guiding how we operate going forward. We have relatively uncomplicated requirements as a local authority, and that is mainly to invest securely our temporary cash balances until they're required, and to arrange for appropriate loans for our limited borrowing for our capital strategy. In respect of investments, we recommend all of our surplus funds are invested by the North Yorkshire Council, for which we have an SLA. And this is why we ask members to approve the North Yorkshire Council Investment Strategy in Appendix 3. Please note this appendix contains financial information relating to the new unitary council, as well as the strategy that members are asked to approve. This approach provides a strong professional approach to investment of our funds and a rate of return, with the key principle being the security of funds rather than that rate of return. Appendix C of the North Yorkshire Council report outlines the institutions that NYC will invest funds with. I think it's good to point out that North Yorkshire County Council becomes part of the North Yorkshire Unitary Council as of April this year. However, that's not had any impact on our SLA agreement, and a new one is currently being entered into with the new Unitary Council that will run for 3 years from April 2023, which is when the current SLA ends. In respect of borrowing, we only borrow in line with the approved capital strategy and only externally with the Public Works loan boards within the authorised limit, which we ask members to approve in Appendix 2. It remains more cost effective to borrow internally from our own surplus balances despite the increases in interest rates. The rate of return on investing our money remains lower than the actual interest we would be charged by borrowing from PWLB. Therefore, the interest we lose by using our own money is less than it would cost in interest. And I apologise if that was a bit confusing. I was struggling to read my own writing here. So the investment approach from North Yorkshire Council is no different from previous years. The creation of the unitary hasn't had an impact in their strategy. remains on the horizon an introduction of a new accounting standard for leases. This is still delayed, and I am still keeping this on the horizon. And this may mean that we have to increase our authorised borrowing limits, as leases will, regardless of the nature of the lease, these will have to come onto the balance sheet. And whilst we don't have a large amount of leases, it will still have an impact. At the moment, this is not due to come in till the 1st of April 2024. As members will be aware, the 22-23 budget for interest was revised from a value of £15,000 to £75,000, and members approved this back in December 2022. This was based on a rate of return that the authority was receiving at 1.6%. However, the Bank of England base rate has continued to increase and was at 4% as of February 2023. Actual receipts to the authority from investment at the 31st of December was £94,000. This means the possible year-end rate of return of anywhere between £120,000 and £140,000. This is purely because of the interest rate rises. The 23-24 budget was set on the basis that the interest rates would remain high and give rise to a return of around £110,000 for the next financial year. Thank you very much.
Justine, thank you. The question that I had immediately for Justine was, does the fact that North Yorkshire is going unitary have any material bearing? And you assure me that it doesn't at all.
Now, I've been assured that there is no material bearing.
I've also established, just as an aside, that the Yorkshire Dales National Park and North York Moors National Park also have the same arrangement with North Yorkshire Council, which gives me some comfort that we're all in the same place doing the right thing with a very reliable host. Questions or comments? Annabelle?
Just on that point, I just wondered, and I'm sure we have scrutiny of this, but we're very dependent on North Yorkshire and how they run their treasury management. What comfort do we have that they are appropriately scrutinised and regulated?
I would say by the fact that they were a county council, they're about to be a unitary council, and they have no there are no issues raised around value for money from their external auditors, and that gives me comfort that they're operating because their treasury management and how will be part of that value for money appraisal from their external auditors, and they've raised no issues.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, we're being asked to approve the policy statement and strategy. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Chris. Second, Andrew. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. Thank you, Justine. Then finally, in part A, James, thank you very much for your feedback report from East Midlands Council General Meeting. Short, to the point, but very useful to keep tabs on what's going on, not least because quite a lot is going on in terms of potential combined authorities and so forth, but there's still a lot to play out there, I think. Okay, that's for noting. And then that's the end of Part A, and we're going to go into Part B. Can I have a mover for Part B, please? Seconder, all in favour?